Hello and welcome. My name is Thomas Kevin Dolan. I'm the writer and author of Little Fag, A Journey of Self-Acceptance and Healing. And today I'm going to read from chapter 3. The title is The Grace of Presence. It begins on page 225 of my memoir. I took a photograph of Mum in 1978, standing on a pier in Oakland, California at Merritt Lake, with rowboats bobbing around on the water. Her expression is ponderous and wistful. It was a trip I took her on to revisit memories she had of her father, who was killed in a cable car accident in San Francisco when she was a little girl. She always spoke of going back one day. It was my honor to take her there. I once asked what she had been thinking when that picture was taken. Nothing much, she replied, just enjoying the sensation of the boats rocking and remembering my dad. Nearly 30 years later, I called her one evening, suggesting we go back to the pier for her to celebrate her birthday. She agreed, and we made our plans to travel, with her choosing to return in May 2007 to that very spot. She took her last breath in October 2006. What I braved. While growing up, one of the most profound ways I knew I'd be okay was that I could smell the freshly baked bread Mum had just made. There was not a lot of food most of the time growing up, but when I smelled bread baking, life felt good. During the last conversation I had with my mom prior to taking her last breath, she made it very clear she did not want to talk about how she was feeling. Mom was clear about what to and what not to waste her breath on. So instead, I asked if she remembered our date, what she had called her last date. She smiled and nodded yes. In 2006, I called her from Vancouver. She lived in Calgary, and I asked if she wanted to go out on a date. Puzzled, she said to me, "But dear, you're in Vancouver, and frankly, I'm not feeling all that well." I told her I'd jump on a plane and be there in a couple of hours. She said, "Sure, what the hell?" By the time I arrived at her home, she was dressed and ready to go. I received full instructions from my brother on the level of oxygen in the portable tank and what to do if something malfunctioned. Mum chose the keg. She loved the surf and turf, so off we went. We were able to get a booth just inside the restaurant, not too far for Mum to walk. She was in her glory and made it clear to all that tended to her that it was her date. I felt so blessed to be with her. As she took a sip of her rum and coke, she said, "You know, Kev, Kevin is my middle name. This will be my last date." I grabbed her hand and thanked her for being with me. As that memory faded and her smile receded, I quickly asked if she'd be interested in one more date. I asked and watched her attempt to make sense of what it was I just asked her. I'm sure she thought, I'm about to die, and there's no way I can go anywhere. Mum was used to strange requests from me. She took a deep breath and said, "Yes, dear." I asked her to remember Merritt Lake in Oakland in 1978 and the rowboat her father took her on, and all that happened when she was 3 years old. It's like her whole body remembered that memory. I asked, "Do you remember our time together there?" She quickly uttered, "Oh my God, do I ever." She continued to share by saying, "And I can still feel the rowboat rocking as Dad rowed around the lake." The one more date I asked Mum to go on was a meeting with me back at that pier in Oakland. I asked her to join me there on her birthday in May of 2007. She agreed. What I braved was ensuring, regardless of what people thought, that there was going to be no stopping me from keeping my date with my mom. As I wrote earlier, Mum took her last breath in October of 2006. As I made my way to Oakland on the BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit, from San Francisco on May 24th, 2007, Mum's birthday, I suddenly realized I had no idea where I was going. It had been 30 plus years since I was there with Mum, so I gently closed my eyes and asked the universe for some help. After all, I did not want to be late for my date. Just as I got off the train, a dear friend called and simply told me to use all my faculties to connect with Mom. Faculties? "What the hell are you talking about?" he said. "I don't know. Just be open to other ways of seeing or feeling your mum," he said. I thanked him and hung up. At the top of the stairs, on the first stop of the BART, I had no idea where I was. Suddenly, with a giant smile on his face, a man appeared and asked, "Can I help you find your way?" I asked if he could point me to Merritt Lake. His directions were amazing, and suddenly, with a rush of memories coming up, I remembered walking this way with Mom. I heard myself murmur, "I'm coming, Mom." As I arrived at the lake, I was able to see the pier Mum stood on some 30 years later. I could not get to it because it was being renovated. My quandary now was, where do I meet Mum? Instead of figuring it out, I asked, "Mum, where do you want me to meet you?" Just then, an older woman, perhaps in her late 60s, spread out a blanket and placed 2 small children on it. Perhaps this was their favorite picnic spot. The woman looked over at me and simply smiled. I sensed she knew I was looking for someone. I moved a little closer to the pier, wondering if maybe I'd been stood up. Suddenly, I smelled bread. Freshly baked bread. I began to cry. I remember saying, "Thank you for joining me, Mum. It's great to feel you again." I stood there for what seemed an eternity and then whispered, "It's time to say goodbye. And I love you, Mom." As quickly as that final "Mom" trickled off my lips, the smell of freshly baked bread disappeared. The unlearning. Simply put, my intention and my intuition, but particularly my intuition, is my inner guide and my inner teacher. I lost count of the number of times I was invited to let it go by my family. Maybe it was the power I displayed when I listened to my intuition. Maybe others in my family witnessed this thing as more than just a gut feeling or some whimsical thought or even a gay power. It was different from how they made their way through life, and it seemed simpler. It perhaps scared them the most because it was a powerful part of me. They watched as I honored this gentle push. They could see me compelled to take a certain path. At times, I did not waver. I was pretty vocal in saying that this feeling I had in the pit of my stomach was a warning when something felt off. Although my nods of confidence were subtle, having my family witness me, knowing the decision I was about to make was the right one, was certainly not the usual dysfunctional way of doing business. I sometimes thought they saw me as a freak. I owned my intuition as being very real and very important. I loved it because it spoke in a quiet voice. Unlike the screams of my family, it rarely pushed for attention, and it had at its core the art of subtlety. This bit of mastery on my part might have been the single biggest reason why I was encouraged to often ignore it. I had no teachers of this fine art. In my day-to-day experience, there were so many who never tapped into their own intuition, let alone used it as if they could. It made me sad knowing no amount of encouragement would help. Quietness or solitude became my place of power from which I could harness the energy of my intuition. When I was able to come from that place, I could actually use it and become more magnetic and draw more positive and more positivity, more people, more situations, and opportunities into my life. It was immensely confusing for me to watch others not want to use their intuitive powers. They seemed to not want to know if it was possible for these positive things to resist their pull if they used their magnetic intuition. The unlearning for me was being able to let go of attempting to force anything in my young life to come my way. That would be the method for generations and decades for my family. I discovered a need and a desire to work on myself first and become the most powerful magnet I could be. My intuition became one of my superpowers. The inner guide became more powerful as I grew up. When I mentioned to my siblings that I wanted a final date in Oakland with my mom, all of them were quite confused because, of course, they knew that she would be dead. When I posed the question to my mom, she hesitated for a moment and then knew exactly what I was talking about. She knew she would have taken her last breath by the time I suggested May 2007. There was some profound magic between the two of us because, of course, I was inferring that we energetically meet in Oakland. And it took her a moment to kind of get that. And as all of that unfolded, with her taking her last breath in October of 2006, me remembering, and it's interesting, I never had to remind her of that last date. I never had to remind her. It's like once we made that agreement, I don't know what it was written in, but it was pretty profound. So with her having made her transition, I didn't have any concern about whether or not she would be there. I simply trusted. I knew I would be there. As I said in the book, come hell or high water, I would be there. And I think what was magic about it, and on some level, profoundly touching, was following my intuition and knowing, right, that notion of, do we believe it and see it, or do we see it and believe it? In this particular case, I knew it to be true the moment I uttered the words, Mom, can we meet in Oakland as a last date on May 24th, 2007. So it gave me an opportunity. It gave me an opportunity to further trust in my intuition. When intellectually, a lot of folks didn't understand it, just thought it was a bit of wackiness from the gay brother. But I sensed it was beyond powerful. And I know that Mom did too. I really, really did. So when I journeyed there, and the pier was under construction, and I was in my head about how to figure it out. And then the older woman with her two kids. It kind of felt like that was a bit of a message from Mom, that maternal energy and where to meet her was closer to the pier and not kind of where I was standing at the time. And then smelling the baked bread. There were no bread factories. There wasn't a McGavin's. If you're listening to this and familiar with McGavin's bread in Canada, there was none of that. It was this lakefront, there were condos behind us, and the moment I smelled that baked bread, I knew she was there. And of course, in thanking her for being there and keeping our date and saying that I loved her and it was time to say goodbye, and the moment I love you, Mom, the moment Mom dropped off my lips, the smell of the bread was gone. And outside of knowing I'm in the vicinity of a bakery, I've never smelt baked bread again. And I'm completely okay with that. One of the joys of being able to share this story in the book, those stories in the book, and now being able to give you a little bit of a background on them, is realizing that my intuition, my essential self, I call it now, is stronger than it's ever been. And I realize now that the foundation and all the quirkiness of how it is that I related to Mom, and even when I took the 3 years away to be away from her to figure out how I could be with her, was me listening to my intuition. So it all fit, right? All of these puzzle pieces fit. And of course, when they weren't fitting, there wasn't a piece missing, I had simply stopped moving them around. So when I finally moved all those pieces into place and had the picture I needed to have, the foundation of the clarity of that picture had taken place because of my intuition and my ability to listen to my intuition. So this is a story I'd love to tell. This is a story that reminds me that although those that we love are not physically present in our lives anymore, they're energetically there all the time. I'm trying to remember who the philosopher is. I nearly had it. Who simply says, we're never gone. We're in a room next to you with a veiled wall. We can see you, you can't see us. I think it was Patanjali's. Yeah, Patanjali's said something, right? Obviously I paraphrase. But I know that Mom is simply being able to see me through a veil, right? And yes, there's a separation, but energetically, there's no distance. There's no distance between us. So this story always lights me up. You can tell with the passion that I tell this story. And I'm glad I included it in the book. It's a reminder that those that are dear to us can always be dear to us. And those that have been near to us are always near to us. Our work is to call to them.